Welcome back to the Ansible Library. Thanks for stopping by again. We're just continuing on doing all the reviews for all the books I've read so far in 2025. These are books that I'm reviewing right now that I have read previously in the year, and I have a Storygraph app on my phone that lets me keep track of everything I've been reading and my thoughts and rankings and on everything. So I've just been going back and sort of doing my thoughts and reviews on all the books I've read so far in the year as I try to work my way towards what I'm actively reading now. I just wanted to do it this way to sort of build up a library of videos that I could do right away and get sort of a base, figure out my format and everything as I work towards the current time. So we're just gonna keep on plugging away. So what I read next in the year was The Mote in God's Eye by Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle. I know the copy I have is pretty beat up and the dust cover is getting torn up a bit, but I love this sort of hardcover edition. I did have sort of the paperback versions of a couple different versions of it, but I just like this hardcover one and thought it would be good to have since it is a very important science fiction book. It is pretty much a story about first contact with alien race, and it's highly considered to be one of the greatest first contact stories ever written, and I can understand why. It is incredibly thought out with the aliens and their society and how they function and how sort of an interaction between these two different races would play out. Necessity of the human crew for secrecy, not wanting to, share any of their technological secrets until they've learned more about this race and discover if they're dangerous or not. But it's this great story following these crews and just the mystery of the aliens is really well played out, and the mystery of the society and the secrets they're keeping and how they discover everything. I don't want to give anything away because the discovery of what is actually going on is a major part of the story and a very well thought out, believable situation with sort of a race like this. They call the alien races the Motes, and they're these weird, sort of asymmetrical, small, sort of furry beings where on one side of their body they have two arms, and the other side they have a single giant arm, but they are broken up into all these different sort of caste systems where there's the engineers who can't communicate, but they can fix and learn to use and improve anything they come upon. And the mediators are like the negotiators, and they're very smart and quick to learn language, and so they're able to communicate with the humans well. And there's the master race and all these other sort of subclasses of races where every race is very specialized in what they do. And it was just a neat idea of how in sort of this society of this very strictly regulated sort of subclass system, what that would look like. But yeah, it was an amazing sort of first contact story. I have the sequel, The Gripping Hand, where I've heard it's not as good. And I can understand why, because what makes the first story, The Mote in God's Eye, great is sort of the mystery of this alien race and figuring out how their society works and how the castes work and how religion works for them and everything like that, and their levels of technologies and stuff. So once all that is known and covered, I could see the next book being sort of a typical alien human story. But I definitely am going to read it just because I'm curious enough to see how it all plays out. And so yeah, I'd highly recommend it. Next up that I read was Journey Beyond Tomorrow by Robert Sheckley. And this book caught me completely off guard. From reading the blurb on the back and the cover art and everything like that, I thought this book was going to go one way, and it completely went a different way. And it sounded like a typical machines rule the world, take over the world, the fall of mankind to this machines or whatever, just from the blurb. And that is not really what it is. And it was one of the funniest books I've read in a long time. It was this satirical take on so many different aspects of sort of modern life. And it was just written like it was just this humorous story in all the situations. It was very much, it felt like almost a, not quite as silly and off the wall as Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series by Douglas Adams, but it just had that sort of feel in certain areas. Like it's following this main character, Jonas, who grew up on this Polynesian island. His parents were these Americans that moved to the island to run this power plant, and they had him there. And he spent his whole life growing up on this island. And when his parents dies, he just takes over running this power plant. And then they shut it down. The corporations feel it's not making money, so they shut it down. So he's without a job. So he decides I'm going to go to America and I'm going to go see where my parents came from. And he's only has the experience of being on this small Polynesian island. So his knowledge of the world is not that great, but he ends up in America, and it's just this series of stories. It's all told as if these are word of mouth stories that have been passed down. By these different members of these island communities in Polynesia, and it's told in this sort of broken, as if you're being, sitting around a fire being told this story of this character Jonas, and just all these different sort of people's, how they understand the story to be of what he went through. And so it's very much these little like vignettes of these situations. He is sent to a prison, but it's people want to stay in the prison and the guards are keeping people out. And like people are trying to sneak into prison and break into prison because there's food and comfort and stuff, and the people in the prison don't want to be left out, and it's like this psychological ward and everything. And he ends up getting a job as this university professor to teach Polynesian history. And it's just this satirical sort of take on academia and universities. And he doesn't know what he's teaching, but he's using the class to teach themselves. And he's only staying one lesson ahead, but he has this reputation as being this great teacher. And so it's all these just like funny little things like that. Or he ends up in the Pentagon, or that it's called the hexagon because it's bigger than the Pentagon, but it's this maze, this unknowable like maze where everybody has a map, but all the maps are wrong to confuse spies. So nobody knows where they're going in this government building. And it's just sort of like poking fun at how nothing gets done by the government because everyone is constantly has no idea where they are, where they're going. The hexagon is run by this man, I think his last name is like Minotaurus. So it's like, the labyrinth and the Minotaur, and all these, he just runs into all these fun characters. And it was awesome. Like I have no idea anything else by him. And it totally caught me off guard. And I thought it was going to be this other, typical science fiction fall of humanity sort of story. And that's not what it was at all. And it's probably one of my favorite for the year so far. Like I can't explain the plot because it is so random and it hops around so much, but it was just each of the little sort of situations Jonas finds himself in. It was just so unique and so clever and just so funny. And so as a total surprise hit for me, I would highly recommend it. It was a great story. So yeah. Next up that I read this year was The Gunslinger by Stephen King. This was the first book in the Dark Tower series. And it's not the first time I've read it. I've read the whole Dark Tower series before. And I think there were 7 books at the time. I think there's more than that now. He's written more. So I got to definitely finish off reading those ones that he's put out. But second time around reading it, it was still just as great. It's this different kind of story than Stephen King is known for. It's this epic, grand, science fiction-y, fantasy, western, horror, grand epic tale. And so it's an amazing series. I would highly recommend it. It is all this was definitely the shortest book in the series. The rest of them are pretty hefty, get bigger and bigger each time, it seems, each book. But it's just following this gunslinger named Roland. It's just about him trying to catch up to this man in black, this evil man, sorcerer, something. You don't really know what he has done or who he is till much later in the book. And it's just following him through this desert and about what he has to do to catch up to this man and his endless drive to catch up to him and to find this dark tower, which we don't know really much about the dark tower or anything. Just he's got this urge to find it and accomplish something in it. And so it was just this amazing little read into this different kind of world, similar to ours in some ways, but very much sort of an old Western field, and it's falling into ruin and society is crumbling, and you don't have any real idea of Roland's age or the history of his family, except for the few sort of like flashback dream memory sequences that you get of his training to be a gunslinger. But it really drew me in. It really drew me in, and you could read this one and finish it and sort of be happy with it. It does end kind of fast, but it ends sort of, if that's all you wanted to get out of it and get this sort of little taste, you could do that. But definitely, since then I've done the next book, The Drawing of the Three, just on audiobook, just because I needed to read some other stuff. But I listened to the audiobook of it, and it's just carries on, picks up immediately from where it left off, and it just gets this ball rolling of this grand epic tale. And it's I would highly recommend it. Don't compare it to that movie they made. And like, the book is way better. This series is way better than the movie. Don't let that movie turn you off from it, because I think it's one of the best epic sort of grand stories that I've read. So I would highly recommend it. Okay, and moving along. Next up that I had read was Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. And it was surprisingly brutal. In like, it was a very good read, but just the brutality of her writing and the events in the book just completely caught me off guard. I knew what it was about, and I had some experience of this with Fledgling from her, which is about a vampire girl and this vampire enclaves and stuff. So I sort of knew what I was getting into with that. But with this one, it just totally caught me off guard in how brutal she can get in some areas. And it's the near future in the United States, and the wealth inequality in America is so great, and the corporate greed is so great, and there's droughts and global warming and stuff like that. And it was this very much this book of the time. Like, it felt like this future that she's laying down in this book, it could be pretty close to happening for real, like just with certain events that's been happening in the world. And so maybe that's why it just hit a little harder, because it is written very believably, and just the situation that the main character Lauren finds herself in, surviving in this world, is spot on. Like, I feel they are her starts out when she's younger, and her family and the sort of the neighborhood she lives in is in this walled and gated community, and they're a bit better off than the rest of the world. They have, her father's a preacher and works at the college, and they have jobs, and so they're still able to afford a house and afford the taxes and afford electricity, and water is becoming more expensive, but they're well off, and they all have gardens, and they're just surviving day to day in this sort of walled community, while the rest of the world falls to economic ruin, and everyone is on the street, and there's roving gangs. And like a drug is in circulation that makes fire incredibly pleasurable to watch. And so there's like mass burnings and cannibals and stuff like that. And she realizes everything is going to get worse before it can get better, and trying to convince her community that they need to establish like escape routes and safe houses on the outside and make a plan for when things inevitably fall. The firefighters and police and sort of that infrastructure is still in place, but it is very much a greedy organization where you have to pay upfront and a lot of money for like the police to come or the firefighters to come, and you have to pay for all the water that's used to put out the fires if your house is burning down. And so people don't trust or rely on sort of those civil services that were there to help them. They're very much a corrupted organization now. And so she is understanding she needs to make a plan. And she was born, she's got hyper empathy. She was born with this condition where she feels people's pain. If she sees people bleeding or hurt or shot or killed or whatever, or like she feels that pain. And it's this constant fear of what would happen if people discover she has this, because it'd be very easy to control her. So nobody knows about it, only select few people know about it. But eventually their community gets overrun and falls, and everyone's killed. And so it's just following her and a select couple survivors traveling north, trying to get to Canada or trying to get to a safer place where it's not as hot and there's more water. And a big part of the story is she has established her own religion called Earthseed, where her main preaching point is like God is change, and you can change what God is by making changes in your life. Like God is not this set entity; it can be whatever you strive for it to be. But she believes as well that humanity's destiny is to spread out to the stars. So Earth is the seed that will then populate other planets and stuff. And I didn't really care so much about that stuff. It was just this weird insert of this sort of like her creating this religion and making these connections with people. And I understood it for what it was with the story and her questioning religion her whole life since her father was a preacher, and her hyper empathy is very much worked into establishing this stuff. And so her goal is to make this sort of a driving force on Earth as she's traveling and finding a safe space. But so it was like the ideas and the plot points and the main sort of what happens wasn't really anything new and unique, but just her writing is so great and so on point and so like unapologetically brutal at points where there was things just caught me off guard, and she didn't pull any punches with like what this world would be like and what people would do to each other. And so it did. I feel like this was the establishing point for me with Octavia E. Butler, and this made me want to go, okay, I will read the vast majority of my other stuff. Fledgling didn't give me that feeling. I just thought it was this vampire story, and it was good and it was well written and it was kind of this different, uniquer tale on vampirism. But this was the book that made me acknowledge her as somebody I definitely want to follow and keep my eye open for anything by her that I could find, because she is hard to find as well in general. So that'll be it for this episode. Thanks for coming by again. Please comment and subscribe and share and like and do all those YouTube things. And hopefully I'll see you next time. Thanks.